Welcome back to another fear-inducing and violent mania-producing episode of What Happened, the YouTube-style pop culture media show that stalks the shadows for the most fractured development stories in the video game and/or movie industries. This week, we'll be walking that fine line between both sanity and madness, as well as delve into one of the 7th generation's creepiest franchises, Condemned, and specifically its slightly more divisive sequel whose box art always kind of freaked me out. Stop staring at me, pervo! Anyway, it's a story about a developer that was expanding more and more by the day, juggling multiple projects and teams, and caught between working for 2 different publishers at the same time. Oh, and also, bum fights. Lots of bum fights. So grab your nearest lead pipe, prosthetic leg, or board with a nail in it as I answer the question, what happened to Condemned 2 Bloodshot?
I have a feeling we're about to get better acquainted.
Monolith Productions is of course the legendary studio that developed the Condemned series, along with many other classic FPSs of the 2000s. In the late 90s, however, they were best known for one of the most frantic and satanic shooters ever made, Blood, which, just rose from its grave with refreshed supply, a definitive remaster packed with oodles of new features and extra content, and best of all, is available absolutely everywhere. Rebuilt from the original source code, refreshed supply packs in the new Marrow scenario along with Death Wish in a future update, unlocked frame rates, increased resolutions up to 4K, expanded mod support, rewritten netcode for the 8-player online deathmatch, local split screen, remastered cutscenes, which it honestly really needed, and tons of other quality of life improvements. In addition to all that, there's the fascinating new Vault feature where you can view concept art, unused sprites, and even play unfinished cut levels from the original game. So all this, along with Blood's slick movement, inventive weapons, twisted levels, and pop culture references,
this is my boomstick!
Are now available on Steam, GOG, EGS, Xbox One, Xbox Series, PS4, PS5, and Nintendo Switch, which truly means that Caleb is indeed
Open for business.
So, if you're interested in getting some cold hard revenge on Chernobog, hit the link in the description or pinned comment below. Thanks again so much to Night Dive and Atari for sponsoring today's video. And now, without further ado, let's get Condemned. As 3D technology was rapidly advancing in the early 2000s, Washington-based Monolith Productions were very much at the forefront of that through their Lithtech engine, which powered such games as No One Lives Forever, the sequel to Alien vs. Predator, and of course, Blood 2: The Chosen, which you can, Anyway, the studio was incredibly busy at that time, evidenced by the glorious year that was 2005, where they released not 1, not 2, but 3 landmark games. The Matrix Online, R.I.P. Morpheus, the very first entry in the Fear franchise, and most salient to our interests today, Condemned: Criminal Origins. Spawning from an idea that Monolith co-founder Jason Hall had, Condemned followed the exploits of Ethan Thomas, an agent in the FBI's Serial Crimes Unit, back when the FBI was a prestigious agency. This harrowing tale started with Ethan investigating a scene left by a local serial killer that had been terrorizing the rougher areas of Metro City. And no, not that one, but holy crap, that'd be cool. These events just so happened to be the first link in a chain of violence that eventually saw Ethan having to fight for his life against a bizarre, bloodthirsty mania that was slowly taking over the city. Condemned 1 was a standout launch title for the Xbox 360, which was made all the more impressive, and they had only been given about 15 months to make it. But fortunately, their designers focused on a singular terrifying idea: brutal, tense melee fighting in dark, shadowy environments against dozens upon dozens of insane, raving madmen. For this episode, I reached out to Matthew Allen, the art lead on both Condemned 1 and 2, who explained that following up with a sequel to Criminal Origins was essentially a no-brainer for a variety of reasons. Condemned did pretty well. Sega and the team were really happy with our first big foray into console dev. Fear 2 was going to be our first PS3 game, but they were a newish team, most of the Fear leads were working on a new game, and a big chunk of the Monolith leadership had been pulled in to help build up WB as a publisher. So we figured we could do a sequel and help push the PS3 tech with the experience we gathered from shipping as a launch title. Like many sequels, there were a number of ideas left over from the first game that the team wanted to include the second time around, but this might be one of those examples where the tight deadline, restraint, and focus the team had to have benefited the first game more than anyone really knew. Fans of Condemned were engrossed with the mixture of grounded forensic investigation sections, which invoked films like The Silence of the Lambs or Seven, mixed with intense first-person combat against brutal vagrants and murderers. In terms of story, Criminal Origins was also designed in such a way where it clearly didn't want to give all the answers as to what was going on, subtly blurring the lines between both reality and the supernatural. Reportedly, that was also by design, because the plan was to expand the narrative more and more and to build out the world of Condemned even further, something that former Monolith staffers have said all came from Jason Hall's Mind Palace. But the team were also looking to improve the sequel in terms of gameplay as well, and took a long, hard look at what they felt should be changed or adjusted. In Dead Domain's video on the development of Condemned 2 Bloodshot, link in the description below, Jonathan Stein, a level designer on the project, stated that the team was quite self-critical during production, and we devoured every review and forum post after release. Transitioning to the sequel, everyone had a list of improvements to explore, such as adding more depth to the combat or making the overall experience less claustrophobic. That then leads into what I said earlier about wanting to build the world out further. In Criminal Origins, you were mostly relegated to tight apartment buildings, basements, subways, stores, and a few alleyways that constricted the player's movement, forming a specific path that designers could fully control to maximize tension and jump scares. Condemned 2, however, saw the range of environments expand out quite a bit, offering a giant haunted factory, a museum, a snowy forest and mountain lodge, a Vec ravenous bear, a theater, and even a floating junk barge. In terms of gameplay, firearms weren't super prevalent in the first entry, as Ethan had to mostly scrounge for makeshift melee weapons, only very rarely getting his hands on something that could fire lead. And even when he did, it was always quite temporary, as they would only carry a few shots each. This, much to the chagrin of certain hardcore Condemned fans, was changed in Bloodshot, because even though it did build upon the hand-to-hand combat, it also placed greater emphasis on guns, shooting, and with much more ammo, something Sega producer Martin Kaplan explained. It's more about varying the experience up and giving more variety to gameplay, and since they were on the same engine as the Fear series, having shooter sequences was relatively low cost to add. Now, while it makes sense to add more and more stuff in a sequel, there's this underlying sense that maybe Monolith were slowly getting away from what made the first Condemned such a unique, creepy experience. The claustrophobic level design, the tight focus on melee combat, the vague and esoteric story, a lot of that probably came from the strict deadline they were under. But now they were given more time and the expectation to deliver something bigger and better. Bloodshot was becoming something else, which was solidified even further with the decision to add multiplayer and the dramatic, somewhat shocking metamorphosis that the main hero, Ethan Thomas, would undergo. Of course, when you make a nerve-shattering horror game that laser focuses in on an intense single-player campaign where it's one person versus many, it's quite curious that someone would then say, well, we gotta add multiplayer modes, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, you'd think this rather odd inclusion that doesn't really fit with the vibe of the franchise was something that was informed purely by the success of Call of Duty or other big FPSs. Turns out the decision to add in a versus multiplayer suite for up to 8 players came from somewhere entirely innocent and accidental. When implementing the new hand-to-hand combat mechanics, a test arena was created where various character models would be placed to duke it out, and it just kind of spun off from there. As per the Dead Domain video, lead animator Richard Lico said the following: "From what I recall, we put together a combat pit as a separate mode outside of the narrative. We team members would often play the combat pit and try to outdo each other on kills when we weren't competing in Pokemon Puzzle League, Geometry Wars, or Street Fighter 3 Third Strike." Nice. I believe the combat multiplayer came from that playtesting. So a separate, smaller multiplayer group was formed to flesh things out further, which included deathmatch, team deathmatch, and even a mode that tried to replicate some of the forensic investigation elements called Crime Scene. Suffice it to say, something that the devs had messed around with during downtime didn't exactly make for a compelling long-term offering, as Bloodshot's multiplayer modes were mostly ignored when the game launched, never really garnering a strong online community. I took the time to ask Matthew Allen about his memories of the genesis of the multiplayer modes, and he came back with something that made perfect sense given Monolith's background. Multiplayer was a huge part of our DNA at the time. Condemned 1 was our first game without it, and we skipped it on the 360 because I don't think we had the tech fully buttoned up in time for launch. But it was really important to us that we build that tech for both consoles, so we did some light work around it. It wasn't a driving factor at all, but it was fun to get the combat system and the sync actions working over the network. So while some balked at its inclusion, others would have their flabber 100% fully gasted when it was revealed in the promotional trailers and previews leading up to Bloodshot's release that Ethan Thomas was returning, but would be doing so in a much different guise. The once typical straight-laced FBI agent was now an alcoholic wreck, prone to fits of rage, a scraggly complexion,
and incredibly foul mouth.
A good percentage of fans did not like this change, as it mostly happened in the interim between both games, so there was certainly a level of tonal whiplash here that many weren't expecting. Frank Rook, the main designer and writer of Condemned 1 and 2, has gone on record saying this was always the plan, but recognizes that opinions were definitely polarized. The main character's transformation between the first and second games was evolutionary as we grew more comfortable with our tech and working on consoles. The character design followed these advances visually. Who the character was reflected the turmoil of the narrative. In the first game, Ethan was just discovering the dark world around him. In Condemned 2, he was a bit broken as a result. His struggle was internal and manifested in alcohol abuse and to some degree, reckless abandon. We didn't explore changing protagonists, although we probably could have done so without alienating fans. This is something Richard Lico also confirmed was an area of concern within the team as well, explaining in the same video, I don't recall where that decision came from. I do remember it being divisive with the dev team. Some felt like Condemned 1's Ethan didn't quite hit the mark, and a darker tone was desired for the sequel, but some felt Ethan was too different in Condemned 2. The choice to replace Greg as the voice actor played a role in the darker tone shift, but I wasn't a part of those discussions. Yes, I almost forgot about this. Ethan Thomas was first played by Greg Grunberg, who played Temmin Snap Wexley in the recent Star Wars films, but also had voiceover roles in other games like Time Shift and LA Noire. For Bloodshot, he was replaced by Andre Sogliuzzo, who has had a very extensive career in video games, but you might know him best from his amazing Al Pacino impression in Scarface, The World Is Yours.
This is my town, my world, George, and nobody's gonna take it away from me.
Fans did not appreciate the sudden change in voice actor though, and while Monolith felt they needed a different actor to inhabit this now very different character, these types of decisions tend to not go over very well. These sudden pivots into different directions didn't end with just Ethan, as Bloodshot's overall story again veered in a direction some fans weren't really on board for. The mysterious violent hysteria that was plaguing the denizens of the first game is explained as being the evil emanations from the head of a cult that were super into worshipping demons from another plane of reality. Demons that actually manifested themselves into the game world that Ethan had to fight. Or did he? See, part of Condemned 2's plot is that our surly, swearing hero would often not know what was reality or just a good old-fashioned hallucination. If I had to sum up the story though, well, things absolutely got way more out there, teetering towards more sci-fi elements and doing a very hard setup for a sequel involving the president that, sadly never came about. This rather abrupt turn to where the narrative went was touched upon once again by designer and writer Frank Rook. Unfortunately, like most horror-based stories, the more information provided, the less terrifying the experience. The paranormal and the unknown are super powerful tools, but very hard to maintain for extended periods of time. There was a general push to fill in the blanks to make sense of everything, maybe go as far as tie up all the loose ends, for better or worse. This latter point was probably the primary driver behind expanding the universe over anything else in my opinion, and I feel mostly responsible for this. The result delivered explanations for things that should have remained a mystery or were basically unexplainable. All of this was laid bare when Condemned 2 Bloodshot was released on the Xbox 360 and PS3 in March of 2008, sadly dropping the PC version that Criminal Origins had had. However, these cooler reactions to all the changes the sequel had implemented that I've been laying out for you is something that grew over time, because across the board, review outlets felt that Bloodshot was around the same level of quality as the first game. So, with pretty good reviews at launch, why was there no follow-up? Well, the entire Condemned IP just seemed to burn itself out pretty quickly. Some of you may recall, and I certainly did not, that Condemned was set to get its own feature film, going through several name changes and directors before it just stopped existing altogether. And no, it has nothing to do with this.
What?
I asked Matthew Allen why the franchise just seemed to sputter out, especially since Jason Hall reportedly had the broad strokes for a third and possibly a fourth game already mapped out. It sold okay for games at that time, but not enough for us to scramble to the next one. That, coupled with the whole studio being asked to focus on helping get Fear 2 out the door, means the team was split up quite a bit and wasn't really able to get back to thinking specifically about the next thing. We were doing technical tests and prototypes in small groups to try out some ideas, but they were IP agnostic, until after we shipped Fear 2, and by then we were firmly into WB IP land, so pushing for a Condemned 3 would have been a very difficult task. And yeah, that's pretty much the reason. WB Games had started to invest heavily in Monolith shortly after the release of Bloodshot, which cut Sega and Condemned out of the conversation altogether. Monolith's original IPs then suddenly stopped as well, as they were set to work exclusively on WB licensed properties, such as Gotham City Imposters and the Nemesis-powered Lord of the Rings titles. This trend continued and then ended with the Wonder Woman game. WB closed Monolith along with several other studios, something I've mentioned a few times in the past, which is frankly already too much. The story technically doesn't stop there though. Co-founder Jason Hall left WB's employ around 2008 and has held a variety of positions since then, but one of the things he also managed to do was become the sole owner of the Condemned property, getting the rights from Sega, who had been the original publisher. Then, in 2015, he announced he was looking for prospective studios who would like to work with him in bringing the IP back, but sadly, there hasn't been any progress made on that front. publicly at least. I say publicly because it is rather curious that the Steam version of Condemned 1 was mysteriously delisted just about a month ago, which means something very dangerous and quite insane could pop up from a dark corner in the future. Thanks again to Matthew Allen for answering all of my questions, and for more additional insight into the minutiae of Bloodshot's development, do check out Dead Domain's channel when you get the chance. And if you know of any other stories in the video game or movie industries that are still skulking in the shadows, shout them out in the comments below or enter the claustrophobic hallways of my social media. See you next time, and thanks for watching!